Did you know there's a chain of stores with more locations than McDonald's and Starbucks combined? It's not KFC or McC, not Family Mart or Circle K, and it's not any tech giant you might be thinking of. The answer is the 7-Eleven convenience store chain. Retail's an industry worth over $2 trillion worldwide. Hundreds of millions of people visit convenience stores every day. And 7-Eleven leads them all, with more than 84,000 stores across over 20 countries around the world. But did you know that a century ago, the concept of a convenience store didn't even exist? Until an ice seller in Texas happened to discover something the whole world had overlooked. The history of 7-Eleven is the story how an entrepreneur saw the future in the ashes of a dying industry. It's about how bold decisions can turn disaster into opportunity. About how a simple idea, when executed at the right time, can completely change the way hundreds of millions of people live and shop every day. And it all started with blocks of ice. Right now, let's join author Duck Thin to explore the miraculous and inspiring story of 7-Eleven's history. Part 1. Historical background. Let's go back to 1927 in America and start a typical shopping trip. You want to prepare a meal for your family. It's simple. You just need meat, eggs, milk, and some vegetables. But you'll have to spend the whole day buying these ingredients. First, you go to the butcher shop to buy beef, then to another store to get eggs, then somewhere else for milk, and finally you buy vegetables and fruits at a completely different location. Each store only sells one type of product. This inconvenience existed because supermarkets didn't exist yet at that time. The idea of a convenience store was unimaginable and didn't exist in anyone's mind. But that wasn't even the biggest problem. The biggest problem was how to keep food from spoiling. Before refrigeration technology was developed, ice was essential in American society. Ice was the only way to keep food cold enough so it wouldn't go bad. Every family, every business needed ice. And where did they buy their ice? The answer is from the ice house. That's what it's called in English, ice house. This is a type of business that has completely disappeared today. But back in the 1920s, they could be found in every town across America. These ice houses sold blocks of ice for people to take home and store in their cellars, making a makeshift refrigerator by packing ice around their food. In other words, the ice house was an essential part of the economy before the age of refrigerators. Meanwhile, in Texas, there was a man named J.O.D. Thompson. Thompson worked at the Southline Ice Company and had an admirable career progression. His first job was taking care of the horse stables. These were the horses that pulled wagons delivering ice to customers. After that, he was promoted to loading ice onto the wagons, then went to college, came back, and eventually became the company's financial manager. From the horse stables to the accounting office, that was J.O.D. Thompson's journey, and that's also why he understood the ice plant business inside and out, from production to distribution, from employees to customers. He knew everything about solid ice. But in 1927, J.O.D. Thompson learned something else. The ice industry was counting down to its demise. The reason was a new enemy called the refrigerator. Back then, Americans didn't really buy refrigerators, not because they didn't want to, but because refrigerators at the time could actually be life-threatening. It sounds dramatic, but it's true. The first refrigerators broke down constantly and often leaked toxic gases. They could make users sick and, in some cases, actually killed people. Who would dare spend money on a machine that could turn their kitchen into a gas chamber? But in 1927, General Electric released a product that changed everything, the monitor top refrigerator. This was a turning point. This refrigerator was much safer than previous models. It could cool below freezing, and most importantly, it was no longer deadly. Like a door had just opened, 56 other companies immediately started developing their own refrigerator models. J.L. Thompson saw the tidal wave coming. He understood that, the way the world was going, refrigerators would soon replace the ice factories. If they didn't evolve, didn't become something else, they would go bankrupt. But evolve into what? The answer came from someone no one expected. Part 2. The breakthrough idea. Now let's meet another character named Johnny Jefferson Green. He was the manager of one of Southland's 16 ice branches in the Dallas area. Johnny was likable and a good listener, so customers really loved him. But that's not all. Johnny also had a small habit, a detail that seems unimportant but would change the history of retail forever. When customers came to buy ice, Johnny would offer them free watermelon and water while they waited. That's all there was to it. A little watermelon bottle of Coca-Cola. The goal was to make customers feel that even if they had to wait 5 or 10 minutes at the ice plant, that time would be pleasant and memorable. Then one day, a customer made an unexpected request. This person wanted to buy a few bottles of Coca-Cola because they had forgotten to stop by the store on the way home. Then, the customer even asked if they could buy a whole watermelon and was willing to pay for it. Johnny paused. This wasn't really the ice plant's business. This sold ice, not soft drinks or fruit. But in that moment, a light bulb went off in Johnny's head. A steady stream of customers, and people were willing to pay for things other than ice. Why not? That's how the first non-ice transaction at a Southland ice plant happened. From these first sales, Johnny started to wonder, why not sell other food items at the ice plant too? The customers were already there, waiting, with money in their pockets. Johnny used his own money to invest in a few essential items like milk, eggs, and fruit, and started selling them to customers coming to buy ice. Sales went up, demand increased, and Johnny realized he couldn't keep up by himself anymore. He needed to talk to his boss about this idea. When he met with JLD Thompson, Johnny presented last week's sales figures. It wasn't just money from selling ice, but also from milk, eggs, and fruit. He proposed that Thompson fund his grocery model in exchange for a share of the profits, since Johnny himself didn't have the resources to meet the growing demand on his own. Thompson was hesitant. This had never been done before. Selling both groceries and ice at the same place sounded both crazy and genius. But Thompson also knew that if this small ice company wanted to survive in the long run, they had to do something different. In the end, he agreed to give it a try. The idea of selling groceries when your main business is selling ice might make sense on paper, but in reality, it was a risky gamble. Why? Because of trust. People trusted you to sell ice. It's just ice, nothing complicated about it. But they don't necessarily have to trust you to sell perishable goods like meat, eggs, and milk. Those are things that could make their families sick if not stored properly. But there was one thing that made this idea almost irresistible. If customers could buy all those things in the same place while picking up ice, how much time would they save? And if they're willing to shop here for the convenience, would they also be willing to pay extra for that convenience? Thompson understood that. While Johnny was selling at market price, Thompson decided to raise his prices. He bet that customers would be willing to pay more to shop at a single location. This is the concept we now call the convenience premium, a completely new idea back in the 1920s. 6 months later, Thompson visited Johnny Green to see the results, and Johnny handed him a sum of $1,000. That was Thompson's share of the profits from selling groceries. $1,000 in 1927, that amount was more than a third of Thompson's entire annual salary. In less than 6 months, by selling milk, eggs, and fruit alongside ice, Thompson saw a much bigger future. This wasn't just a small experiment to make a little extra money. This could be the solution that saved the whole company, so he took action. Thompson poured company money into expanding the grocery business. What Johnny had done, Thompson scaled up across all 16 of his ice plants. They added shelves, expanding to 12 different food items. Joe Thompson was making a big bet. Johnny's store might just be an exception, a one-off phenomenon, but he was willing to take the risk. Interestingly, this was actually the very first seed of what we would later look back on and call the convenience store. But the excitement was quickly snuffed out. You see, ice factories didn't just sell ice to households. A large part of their revenue came from selling ice to grocery stores, which needed it to preserve their goods. Refrigeration technology at the time was still new and very expensive. Many small grocery stores still depended on ice, and who did they buy it from? From Joe Thompson. But now, Joe Thompson, the very person they've been buying ice from all this time, is selling groceries. He's now directly competing with his own customers. The grocery stores were outraged and decided to leave Thompson's. The money he made from selling groceries wasn't enough to make up for losing these major customers. Thompson had unintentionally angered his most important customers, putting the company at even greater risk than before. What he thought could save the company turned out to be the very thing driving it toward bankruptcy. In 1928, Joe Thompson had just lost his biggest ice customers. The money he made from groceries still wasn't enough to make up for it. Most people would have backed down, reconsidered, maybe given up on the grocery idea and apologized to their old customers. But Thompson wasn't like most people. Instead of backing down, he started thinking about what else he could sell. How could he attract more customers? What did people need? And suddenly, he noticed a new kind of business popping up all over America: gas stations. Back then, if you wanted to fill up your car, you had to go to specialized shops. Gasoline was stored in containers that held nearly 20 liters. You had to use a funnel to pour each container into your car, which was inconvenient, messy, and dangerous. But now, you could just drive up to a gas station and have an attendant fill up your tank. And by the late 1920s, nearly half of American households owned a car, up from just 20% at the start of the decade. Thompson recognized that trend. Cars were becoming deeply integrated into American life, and he thought this would be the next step. But converting an ice plant into a gas station was a huge gamble. Gasoline is very different from ice, and in fact, it can be extremely dangerous if not handled properly. Thompson would have to partner with professional gas station operators, and the cost would be equivalent to $500,000 in today's money just to install gas pumps at 5 stores. Thompson made a big bet on this idea. The interesting thing about Joe D. Thompson is that he saw every threat as an opportunity. The following year, as car ownership continued to rise, more and more customers who needed gas chose Southland. Now, people could stop to get gas and buy groceries at the same time, or vice versa, swing by for groceries and conveniently fill up their tank too. The loss of those old customers was now just a distant memory. And if you think about it, in today's America, no one can imagine a gas station without a convenience store or a pharmacy attached. That idea started right here with Joe D. Thompson in Southland. In 1929, Thompson began buying up competing ice plants and outfitting them with gas pumps. From 30 locations, he was aiming for 30 more. Everything was looking optimistic. Over the next decade, Thompson kept adding new products, and one of them became an essential draw for the convenience store experience. None other than beer. It was the era of the Great Depression. People wanted to drink to forget their failures. If beer was available there, they'd buy it. People started to realize they could pick up a cold bottle of beer on their way home. And when they came in for beer, they discovered a few other things could go home with them too, like canned goods, potato chips, candy, or cookies. Basically, every food and drink need you could think of. Thanks to beer sales, Thompson expanded his business to 75 stores across Texas. A decade after making that bold decision, groceries had now surpassed ice to become the company's best-selling product. Part 3. The origin of the name 7-Eleven and nationwide expansion. By the early 1940s, Thompson was now running a company with annual sales of over $1 million, and he was obsessed with growing it even bigger. But after World War II ended, a major threat emerged. Post-war America saw the rise of a new kind of place called the supermarket. Before, you had to shop at several different places, but suddenly the supermarket had everything you needed. The supermarket really became a new concept, and that was a problem. Thompson had very limited shelf space, so he could only carry 1 or 2 brands of each type. But supermarkets could carry all the brands, and because they could buy in huge quantities, they could sell at lower prices than anyone else. This was a direct threat to Joe D. Thompson's business model. Thompson, he needed something with its own unique identity. After World War II, there was more work to do. People spent more time at their jobs. There were night shifts, early morning shifts, and long working hours became the norm. But at supermarkets, the hours were still from 9 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon. On many evenings, when Thompson's stores were about to close at 8 o'clock, quite a few customers would rush in, clearly in a hurry. These people had just finished their shifts and only needed to buy milk and butter. They had raced from work to get here and were willing to pay extra as long as they could get what they needed. Joe D. Thompson realized something important. People were working different shifts, but they still needed a place to buy groceries. During the later hours, they had nowhere to go. He saw an opportunity. Joe D. Thompson decided that with people getting busier and working longer hours, he needed all his stores to be open 16 hours a day. That is, from early morning until almost midnight, specifically from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Today, we might see this as normal, but back then, no one had dared to think of it, let alone actually do it. Businesses at that time typically opened from around 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening at most. If you owned a restaurant, you'd close up by 7 or 8 at the latest. But staying open past 9 p.m. was completely unheard of for any business. Thompson didn't just want to offer the service, he wanted to make sure no one forgot its value. So he was about to do something really bold. He would engrave the new opening hours right into the company's name. On January 6, 1946, Thompson rebranded 75 of its stores across Texas with a name that would become globally known and synonymous with convenience. 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven gradually gained a loyal customer base because it kept its lights on later than its competitors. People appreciate the convenience of being able to pop into the store to buy essentials outside of regular hours. You want to have a snack at 10 o'clock at night. Grocery stores closed at 5 in the afternoon. Where would you go? Of course, to 7-Eleven. By the early 1950s, Thompson felt the time was right to expand beyond Texas. There was a bustling network of roads and highways. Everyone was on the move. They started placing 7-Elevens at highway exits and places where people were driving. It's important to note that this was before the fast food boom. McDonald's still hadn't really figured out how to expand and franchise yet. There was no Walmart, no Kmart. Joe D. Thompson realized this business model was pretty easy to replicate. The cost of entry wasn't difficult. The buildings were pretty simple and you didn't need a lot of staff to run them. So this was a very efficient model. 7-Eleven was one of the first nationwide retail chains that could be everywhere. By 1958, 7-Eleven had grown from 80 locations in Texas to 300 stores across Florida, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Now they attracted customers with an even wider variety of goods. It started to look like the mini marts you can walk into today. They had a bit of everything, like a little of this and that. With 300 stores under his belt, Joe D. Thompson looked at what they had built with pride, but he also reminded everyone not to ever think that what they had was enough. The supermarket was expanding every day, and the next generation would have to move the company forward. Thompson started looking at building on his success while mentoring his son John. John actually started working from a young age, in almost exactly the same way as Joe D. He started out in the stables, and his father made him prove himself. There was a lot of pressure on John. He knew that one day he would have to follow in his father's pioneering footsteps, and that was an enormous responsibility to bear. R4. The new generation in the brink trick. In 1961, after nearly half a century of leadership, the visionary founder of 7-Eleven, Joe D. Thompson, passed away from cancer. He left behind an empire, a brand that was gradually becoming an icon, and a son who had to shoulder it all. John Thompson stepped up as president with an enormous burden on his shoulders. His father had invented a type of retail that had never existed before. He turned ice plants into convenience stores, gas stations into shopping spots, and cold beer into a fiercely competitive product. Now John had to prove himself worthy of that legacy. But the outside world doesn't wait. Success always brings imitators. His family's business model was now being copied by a slew of competitors across the country. Cabela's in Texas, Little General in Florida, and especially Circle K expanding out of Arizona. There was a convenience store on almost every corner. The problem wasn't that they did better than 7-Eleven. The truth was they didn't even have to. They all sold the same things: milk, eggs, candy, gas. If 7-Eleven was on one side of the street and Circle K was on the other, customers could pick either one. That's why 7-Eleven was losing market share every day. Investors were getting anxious. To them, the company was Joe D. Thompson and Joe D. were gone. John knew he needed to do something bold to reassure the shareholders, and he made a wild promise: $1 billion in sales. At that time, no retailer in America had ever reached that number. The commitment sounded like a fantasy. But once the words were out, John had to figure out how to make it happen. He needed an exclusive product, something that would make customers choose 7-Eleven over any other store. And the answer came from a failed entrepreneur in Kansas named Omar Nedlick. Omar Nedlick came from a poor farming family, and he himself was no business genius. He once tried his hand at running an ice cream shop and failed miserably. After that, Omar tried his luck running a hotel, and that didn't go well either. Now, he was struggling with a franchise issue in a small Kansas town. And then, in the heat of a Kansas summer, yet another challenge appeared. Omar's soda fridge broke down. Customers were getting really annoyed because there were no cold sodas. Omar was desperate. In his confusion, he threw some bottles of soda into the freezer to chill them quickly. When he took them out, he discovered something unexpected. The soda had turned into a strange, slushy mixture. It wasn't ice, but it wasn't liquid either. It was somewhere in between the two. Omar thought no one would want to drink the stuff, but he was wrong. Customers loved it. The sweet, icy flavor melted on the tongue in a way no other drink could replicate. Omar quickly became the owner of the best-selling Dairy Queen store in the state. However, the problem was that Omar couldn't just keep putting bottles in the freezer forever. He needed a machine that could consistently create that perfect texture. So he built one himself. Omar tinkered with a car air conditioning system, combined with the principles of a soft-serve ice cream machine. After many experiments, he created a device that could chill soda to just the right slushy consistency without freezing a solid. He called his product the IC. But Omar only had a small shop in Kansas. He needed a big partner to take the IC nationwide, and he knew exactly who to approach. In 1965, Omar Knedlick walked into John Thompson's office with an IC machine. He proposed putting these machines in every 7-Eleven store across the country. At first, John was skeptical. He didn't really understand what was so special about super chilled soda, but then he took a sip. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever tasted before. It wasn't a creamy milkshake, nor was it just regular carbonated soda. This was something completely new, icy cold, melting on the tongue, sweet but not overwhelming. John wanted exclusive rights immediately, but Omar shook his head. He had already sold IC to several other places. However, there was still an offer on the table. If 7-Eleven bought the machines, they would have the right to give the product its own name. With 7-Eleven's marketing machine, John could turn this drink into an icon. People would forget IC ever existed. They would only remember the name that 7-Eleven gave it. The question was, what should they call it? In 1966, 7-Eleven launched the new product with a name inspired by the sound you make when you sip it through a straw, Slurpee. In English, slurp describes the slurping sound people make when they drink. Just imagine this, a cup of brightly colored rainbow-like drink, so cold it gives you brain freeze, thick enough that you have to suck hard through the straw just to get a taste. When it touches your tongue, it slowly melts, releasing a cool, sweet flavor that spreads throughout your mouth. 7-Eleven knows exactly who will be obsessed with this one-of-a-kind product, none other than young people. The baby boomer generation was entering their teenage years. They had pocket money and they loved new and exciting things. They needed a place to hang out. 7-Eleven turned its stores into a hangout spot for teens. Slurpee cups were designed with eye-catching colors. The store stayed open until 11 p.m., which was pretty late for high schoolers back then. 7-Eleven almost became a bar for teenagers, except instead of alcohol, they had Slurpees. In its first year, Slurpee brought in $500 million in sales. To this day, it's still a cultural icon in America. People drive all over town hunting for limited edition flavors. Kids were hooked from the name alone. Many people still remember their first Slurpee as an unforgettable childhood memory. Back to John Thompson. $500 million was only halfway there. He had promised shareholders $1 billion, and he needed more breakthrough ideas to keep his word. This time, the idea didn't come from an outside embedder. It came from a 7-Eleven store itself. Part 5. Coffee to go and the Big Gulp idea. A 7-Eleven store manager started to notice that his customers were coming in very early. They'd buy gas, grab a few things, and then rush off to work. He realized they were missing something. That's right, it was coffee. Back in the 1960s, even though Americans loved coffee, they could only drink it in two places, at home or sitting in a restaurant. No one thought about carrying a cup of coffee on the go or drinking it in their car. His 7-Eleven store owner decided to try something new. He set up a pot of hot coffee right at the counter, pouring it quickly for customers to take with them. Since the method was pretty basic, with thin cardboard cups and no lids, hot coffee would easily spill onto their hands, but customers still bought it. Word of this reached John Thompson. He went there himself to check it out. John immediately saw the problem. The idea was good, but the execution lacked finesse. The cardboard cup didn't keep the coffee hot, and without a lid, you couldn't drink it in the car. This was a product made on a whim, not a serious business strategy. But John saw huge potential. Americans were spending more and more time in their cars, commuting to work, taking their kids to school, running errands. They needed coffee, but didn't have time to sit down and drink it, and 7-Eleven could solve that problem. John decided to develop a professional to-go coffee system for the entire chain of stores. In the late 1960s, 7-Eleven launched the first branded foam cup in history, made specifically for to-go coffee. The cup kept drinks hot, had a tight-fitting lid, and was designed to fit perfectly in a car's cup holder. For the first time, Americans could drink coffee anytime, anywhere. These days, coffee shops are everywhere, offering unique cups, cute lids, and convenient pricey holders. It's interesting to realize that to-go coffee didn't start at Starbucks or any other famous coffee chain. It actually began at 7-Eleven. Thanks to to-go coffee, 7-Eleven sales skyrocketed. And then John Thompson did what everyone thought was impossible. He reached $1 billion in annual sales. That crazy promise from years ago had now become reality. Don proved he inherited his father's gift, the ability to see what Americans needed before they even realized it themselves. John poured money into expansion plans. By 1968, there were 3,000 stores. By 1974, there were 5,000 stores. The growth rate was dizzying. The new stores were designed to be more modern, with better lighting and smarter layouts. Customers would come in, grab what they needed, pay, and be out in just a few minutes. But rapid growth always comes at a price. While money was being poured into building new stores, the old ones were neglected. Outdated equipment, cramped spaces, and new competitors with more modern facilities started to steal customers away. And at one of those old, struggling stores, a desperate manager was about to accidentally create 7-Eleven's next iconic product. In 1976, in Southern California, store manager Dennis Potts was facing a harsh reality. Sales at the 7-Eleven stores in his area were dropping. Rumors of layoffs were spreading. Potts needed to find a way to save his job and his employees. Then one day, a Coca-Cola representative stopped by with a strange proposal. The representative handed Potts a case of oversized paper cups, each holding merely a liter. Potts looked at them skeptically. At that time, a standard soft drink cup was only about 180 milliliters, about the size of a small soda can today. The cup Coca-Cola was suggesting was 5 times bigger. Who could possibly drink that much soda? Potts thought this was a ridiculous, bizarre idea. Nobody needs a bucket of soda. But he was desperate. The store needed something different. Whatever, let's just give it a try. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Soda sales at Potts' store skyrocketed. Customers weren't just buying those giant cups. They kept coming back for more, day after day. This time, word quickly reached headquarters as well. John Thompson looked into it and saw the potential. Large-sized sodas could become 7-Eleven's next signature product. But he didn't want to just sell big cups of soda. 7-Eleven needed a name, a brand, something people would remember, just like Slurpee. The marketing team sat down together. Slurpee was a hit because the name evoked an action. You don't just drink a Slurpee, you'll slurp it through a straw with that signature sound. So what about the giant soda cup? When you're holding a cup that big, you don't just take little sips. You chug, you gulp, you take big swigs. That's right, Big Gulp literally means a big gulp. It was the perfect name. In 1976, Big Gulp officially launched. Nearly a liter of soda in a single cup for just a little more than the price of a regular small cup. Customers would look at it and think, that's such a good deal, how could I pass it up? Nobody really needs almost a liter of soda, but when you see you're getting so much more for just a little extra, everyone wants to buy it. That's the genius behind a Big Gulp. It's not selling soda, it's selling the feeling of getting an amazing deal. Over the next 5 years, 7-Eleven soda sales quadrupled, as food chains immediately took notice. McDonald's launched its supersize option for sodas and fries. Burger King and Wendy's followed suit. The entire fast food industry entered a race to supersize everything. Big Gulp kicked off a new consumer philosophy. Bigger is better and more is worth more. From a box of cups that Coca-Cola practically had to force Dennis Potts to take, Big Gulp became a symbol of American consumer culture. And because this is 7-Eleven, you can buy it anytime, early in the morning and the middle of the night, 7 days a week. Part 6. Success and Legacy. By the mid-1980s, John Thompson was no longer counting sales by the year. He counted by the quarter, $1 billion every 3 months. From its humble beginnings as an ice house in Texas, 7-Eleven now spans the globe with over 80,000 stores, more than any other retailer. The story of 7-Eleven isn't just a business story. It's a story about seeing opportunity in the midst of crisis. Johnny Thompson faced the collapse of the ice industry. Home refrigerators were about to wipe out his entire line of work. Instead of giving up, he saw the future. People would pay for convenience. Cars would change the way Americans lived. Work hours would get longer and people would need to shop at times when no one else was open. And most importantly, he didn't just think about it, he actually took action. John Thompson carried on the legacy with a bold promise and a series of breakthrough products. Slurpee, to-go coffee, Big Gulp. Every innovation came from a simple principle, understanding what customers needed before they even realized it themselves. And remember the everyday people who helped write this history. Omar Knedlik, with his broken refrigerator, accidentally created the recipe for the Slurpee. Dennis Potts, with 500 giant cups that nobody wanted, gave birth to the Big Gulp. Or even back in the early days, Johnny Green started the concept of the convenience store by handing out free slices of watermelon. Seemingly crazy ideas from people whose names no one remembers, that's exactly how history is made. Not in fancy boardrooms or perfect business plans, but in those everyday moments when someone dares to ask, why not? The next time you stop by a convenience store at 11 at night to grab a bottle of water, some snacks, or a few personal items, remember that this simple experience didn't always exist. It all started with 7-Eleven, with a man on the verge of failure in Texas who saw the future in a melting block of ice. We hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support us.